The world looks to California to answer the hard questions, for redemption, to introduce the unfamiliar, to be resilient. Because California bounces back, holds us accountable, values who we are, remains vigilant, defies those in our way, and stands for community. Here on the West Coast, we're at the center of it all. Los Angeles Times, the state of what's next.
Welcome to this evening's Ideas Exchange.
When these conditions arise, we arise too.
And I think that sometimes limitation is good for artistry and good for creativity.
You're at a situation where you're like, well, is it worth it?
You cannot be an effective leader if you shortchange yourself.
I love asking why. That is my favorite question to ask, is just the why.
Take that passion and do something great with it. Save the world.
I don't have any more secrets. And that is a wonderful way to go through life.
Thank you all for watching this story, video, post, whatever this is. Thank you so much. Bye.
Good evening, and welcome to tonight's edition of a limited series of conversations exploring free expression issues in Southern California, co-presented by Los Angeles Times Ideas Exchange and PEN America. I'm Jen Dees, the Los Angeles Programs Director at PEN America, which is a literary and free expression advocacy organization. We champion the freedom to write, recognizing the power of the word to transform the world. In our 100th year, we continue to unite writers and allies to celebrate free expression and defend the liberties that make it possible. We encourage you to explore our research and programs, which examine and address issues such as access to local news, the impact of mis- and disinformation, censorship in Hollywood, the rise of book bans, and equity and inclusion in the world of books. Tonight's conversation follows the publication of PEN America's latest report of the same name, Reading Between the Lines, Race, Equity, and Book Publishing, which can be found on pen.org. As panelist Richard Jean So has documented, an overwhelming majority of books published between 1950 and 2018 were written by white people. In response to a wave of literary activism, our country's largest publishers are making efforts to diversify their workforce and the stories they publish, and the stakes are high. In the words of Elizabeth Mendez-Berry, Vice President and Editor of One World, those who work in publishing act as stewards of the stories this country tells about itself. Without a diversity of storytellers, characters, and experiences, this American archive is far from complete. Tonight, we look forward to hearing from Krishan Trotman, founder and publisher of Legacy Lit, an imprint of Hachette Book Group. And from Santa Ana, California, we have Marytza K. Rubio, a National Book Award longlisted author and director of community engagement at the Segerstrom Center for the Arts. We have Elizabeth Garriga, publicity director at Little Brown and Company. And lastly, author Richard Jean So, the researcher who has written the book on this very subject. I'm now honored to introduce tonight's moderator, LA Times multi-platform editor, Javon Phillips.
Hello, Jen. Sorry about that.
Hi.
This is going to be a great conversation. I'm hoping, I know it will be. And welcome everyone as well to the LA Times and PEN America Virtual Ideas Exchange. As was said, my name is Javon Phillips, and I'm a multi-platform editor at the LA Times. Simply put, I place things on the entertainment section of the website in the right places, and I write features from time to time. The title of today's chat is Reading Between the Lines, which will be a discussion of race, equity, books, and the cultural diversity in the publishing today. Jen did a great job in introducing our distinguished panelists, and so I will do it again just in case anybody missed what she was saying. We have Elizabeth Garriga, Director of Publicity at Little Brown and Company. She has worked with many admired thought leaders and best-selling authors, including Malcolm Gladwell, Carlos Santana, Secretary Julian Castro, and Tavis Smiley, and more. We also have now Marytza K. Rubio, who is a writer and a National Book Award nominee from Santa Ana, California, and she holds an MFA in creative writing and is the founder of Makara Center for the Arts. Her most recent work is Maria Maria and Other Stories. She's also a 2008 PEN America Emerging Voices Fellow. Actually, we have Richard Chinso. He's an associate professor of English and data science at McGill University. He specializes in using computational and data methods to study culture. His most recent book is Redlining Culture, A Data History of Racial Inequality and Post-War Fiction. And lastly, we have Krishan Trotman, who is the vice president and publisher of Legacy Lit, which is an imprint dedicated to books that give voice to issues, authors, and communities that have been underserved. She's also the author of the Queens of the Resistance series, a book series celebrating 4 Congresswomen. Thank you all for joining us for this chat. And, I think just in terms of the world of publishing right now, I guess the biggest news that's happened in the last few days or so was a judge blocking the Penguin and Random House takeover of Simon & Schuster. I know this isn't specifically what we're talking about here today, but I'm sure it has bearing in general in the publishing world. And I just wanted to see if any of you may have had any opinions on that and on, I think the entertainment industry in general is shrinking, and this is just another aspect of it. But it's apparently been well upheld that the Biden administration kind of, got a victory on this. Does anyone have anything that they might want to throw that way? I'll say Richard first, because maybe this is also something that's in a historical context.
I think my other colleagues will have more to say, but I don't know much about the recent events. Just from a historical perspective, though, conglomeration has always been an issue with publishing. The conglomeration of the shrinking of the number of publishers into larger conglomerates. And in terms of the topic of our discussion today, that trend has never benefited racial minority writers. That conglomeration has always punished minority writers. So in terms of the history of conglomeration and the shrinking of publishing, that historically has been very bad for minority authors.
Okay. If anyone else has anything they want to say about it, I can move on from that, but that was just something I was going to open with. Now, which kind of, I'll start with you, Elizabeth. Which barriers to kind of equity are unique to the publishing industry itself? And which are kind of common across, arts and culture and the industry landscape in general?
Sure. I mean, I think the biggest barrier is that working in the arts doesn't pay well, especially at the entry level. So we can get people into the industry, but often, and I think that's a hurdle that is going to continue to be an issue. It's not just book publishing. It's what, if you're working in theater or music or at an art gallery, those kinds of jobs aren't, as lucrative. Oftentimes people of color are coming from working class backgrounds or first generation, college educated, and feel more personal pressure and familial pressure to pursue other careers, things that have traditionally been known to be more practical, whether it's medicine or law or accounting or, just something that is more traditional on paper. So I think that's the biggest issue and the biggest hurdle. We're just, those scales are just not equal yet.
Okay, I will also pose that question to you, Marytza, since you're, a writer in general, and in terms of what you've seen, what were the biggest hurdles for you in becoming a writer?
Well, I think I completely agree with what Elizabeth said, that there are these challenges in entry level in the arts industries, particularly in nonprofits. And I've always balanced, my writing life with my nonprofit work or working in the arts. And that's what I see recurring now working at a performing arts center, is that we're having trouble with recruitment and retention of BIPOC employees. And as a writer, I think that it's carving out that time where you feel the pressure, you want to do well in your day job, especially in the arts, where that you're sort of acting as a gatekeeper. Where I'm at right now, we present and we produce concerts and cultural festivals and dance workshops, and we want to make sure that we're giving opportunities to artists of color. And then, trying to maintain that practice at home when I'm writing, that does become kind of that tension where you don't have just the total liberty to, write all day because it pays all the bills. So, I think that I see it from both sides.
Totally understood. I'll give this to Krishan. What drew you to publishing? Because of it's a tough field to be in. So what drew you to publishing, and what is kind of like the origin story of the Legacy Lit that you founded?
What drew me to publishing was a Black woman that I met. Her name was Marytza K, and actually she's on the PEN board, I believe. But she was a senior editor at Simon & Schuster, and she came into my class one day. I was in the CUNY publishing program. And I had never thought about being an editor, and just to see someone look like me and speak about her job and all the great other writers and multicultural figures that she was publishing that I had never heard of, I was just really excited, and that was my entryway. And so when I created Legacy Lit, I did it because that has always stuck with me. Representation matters, and with the uprising of 2020 due to the death of George Floyd, but the uprising in publishing for more, I had that same impression in my mind, which is, I know that I was happy that it was being called out, and I was excited, but I knew for me, a lot of it was about having representation available in-house, especially on the executive level. And so I went and I just felt like, okay, well, someone's going to call me from HR because I'm like one of the only Black editors here, and ask me what I think should be done. And for me, the answer was to do something that was going to create stability, but also hiring opportunities and opportunities for authors. So I just thought, well, Hachette doesn't have an imprint like Amistad or One World. I want to create something that represents what the future of publishing should look like. So Legacy Lit, we publish all authors, and we are committed to diversity. And we are also unapologetic about uplifting BIPOC authors. So that was the vision, and it really started with my entry and my foundation in publishing, which was with a Black woman, and actually the imprint that we were at, Atria Books, when it was run by Judith Kerr, was very diverse and one of the few diverse imprints at the time. So that has always stuck with me, and I want to provide that for others.
Yeah, that's very cool. At the beginning, Jen mentioned this particular stat that I think came from Richard, that according to one analysis, 95% of American fiction books published between 1950 and 2018 were written by white people. What are the kind of historical patterns that led to this happening? We know the history of the country and racism and opportunism and things like that, but what kind of are some specific patterns that I see Krishan is helping to kind of overcome those patterns, but what were some that you found out through your research that we can apply to helping everything get better?
Yeah, it's a great question, thanks. I think the most important thing that drove this inequality with authors is the lack of Black and other racial minority editors, staff. That's where it all starts, that if you don't have acquisitions editors that are interested in publishing writers of color, that inequality is going to stay very severe, 95% white, 99% white. And so that's really the broader pattern, that there just hasn't been enough hiring at the staff level to diversify authors on a consistent basis over the past 70 years. The other pattern, though, is that periodically there is an interest in Black and racial minority issues in the public, and places like Random House, they will hire one Black editor or maybe two Black editors. So for example, in the late 80s and early 90s, they hired Toni Morrison, obviously the very famous author, as one of their only Black editors. And she did a great job of publishing a number of Black writers and novelists like Toni Cade Bambara. But the problem is that as soon as she stopped being editor, she became a full-time author. She wasn't replaced, and the number of Black authors that they're publishing at Random House after she leaves totally plummets. It goes from 8% back to 1%, which is where it was for most of the 1970s. So I think the lesson that we learned from the past is that you really need this structural transformation, and it's got to be enduring, and you need people to really stay and affect a more permanent institutional change. So it's just that what history tells us is that change can happen, but it's often very ephemeral and short-lived, and you really need that permanent institutional transformation.
These longstanding business practices that kind of have to be re-examined and even torn down in many cases. For these, I'll ask you, Elizabeth. I'll direct this towards you. What specifically are you seeing this happening at all and in the executive ranks? And what can people do to kind of try to help that along?
In terms of hiring editors of color?
hiring people of color as executives that will help bring in more writers and editors and everything else underneath them to help the whole industry itself kind of rise.
Sure. I mean, I saw it at my own company, Little Brown, really aggressively searching for and seeking out talented editors of color, starting in 2020. I'm sure that they were looking before that, but when that incredible moment happened with George Floyd, it was like a sea change, right? But prior to that, it was very, I've been in publishing 20 years now, and I worked in departments that were entirely white, and where the entire editorial staff was white, and you just didn't really even question it. Even if in the back of my head, I thought it was odd, or it wasn't, I went to a college that was very diverse, and really our professors and, there was a strong emphasis on international, recruiting international students and all of that. So when I entered publishing, it did in an unhealthy way, but because it was just, if you're surrounded in a sea, you can't really see anything different. So that was what I kind of got used to. And now that we do have editors of color, incredibly talented people, I just find it so refreshing. And it shouldn't just be one editor. It shouldn't be one Black editor and one Asian editor. It should be, multiple, in the same way that there are multiple white editors. But I also know, just as I don't know many other Latina book publicists, not many, it takes time to find the talent and to kind of get out of the bubble. And a lot of that is going to be starting from the ground up, getting a new generation of young people who will want to stick it out. I think what's happened in the past is, you'll get a crop of new young talent, but they'll stay a year, 2 years, just not really see.
Seems that we've, Elizabeth is frozen a bit. You froze for a second. Well,
sorry
5 seconds. It's okay. You can continue your answer.
Just to finish that thought, I think some of it is seeking out the talent that might be outside of the, the New York City bubble. I think that's one of the issues. There's also a geographic bubble. But I also think it's going to be starting from the ground up, recruiting an entire new generation of young talent and making them feel supported so they want to stay 10 or 20 years and really make it, a name for themselves. It takes time. It takes time to develop the relationships, to find that book that, is going to hit. And that's not necessarily going to happen in your first 3 or 4 years working in publishing. And if a young person is feeling discouraged and feeling like they're not making any money.
Well, okay, we paused again. Well, sorry about that, Elizabeth. I'll go on to the next question now. Well, what she's speaking on in terms of authors of color, this is for, more from Marytza and Krishan too. Authors of color are kind of facing pressure to write characters that represent their culture while also, preventing their book from being categorized as a niche book. Following up on what Richard was saying earlier, what are the roles that authors and publishers can play in changing the historical dynamic of how books are categorized and kind of marginalized in terms of how they're just marketed in general as well? Is there something that you, as both of you as writers, can do to kind of help change the mindsets of what people are thinking about your works?
So I can go first, but I'm going to talk not from a writer's point of view, but from a publisher. I mean,
Okay.
I listen and this conversation and beyond there's just always this editorial focus where publishing is just, it goes way beyond editorial. There's multiple departments. There's special sales, there's publicity, marketing, there's contracts, there's just so much that is needed to have sort of real diversity in publishing. And I think what for authors, it starts with the support is, again, diversifying and focusing on really important areas of publishing, like what Elizabeth does, which is the publicity and the marketing. And I think that's where a lot of authors get very frustrated. And for years, it has been very frustrating for Black editors and editors of color because there's this constant argument of, we don't know how to find your audience. And then there's sort of this pushback and this need and desperation for authors of color to be mainstream. Some of them really want to be mainstream. Others think they have no choice but to be mainstream. So they don't think that they can be successful if you're marketing them to their audience, if to Black, only if that's part of your marketing plan or your publicity plan is to reach Black people, because it has not been shown that that's how you become like a Stephen King or other big brand authors. And these people, they're here to win and they want to be just as successful as white authors. So I think there's just the issue of, where do you want to be as a writer? And it's very complicated as writers of color to figure out, well, which field am I going to play from? Because obviously I meet a lot of writers of color and Black authors that, they're like, I wrote my book for Black people. And now that's I hear that more, but earlier, especially before Floyd, I just didn't hear that because everyone is afraid of that. If I do that, then I'm not going to be successful. And you should not feel that way. You should go for the audience that you want. And my suggestion to writers is always go for the audience that you want and let everybody else follow. And that's usually realistically how it works, how you become successful. If you go out too wide and you just want to get everybody, it's harder to do. But if you have a target and you really go for them, then they can create the bubble that you need to bring others in. And so I just think that it all starts, I think that what could help writers if this conversation about publishing that we're having nationally, internationally, can also really talk about what publishing really is and not just the editorial end of it. Because editors and writers are doing the work and trying to figure out, how how to, write the characters that I want and do everything. But it kind of ends sometimes when you get to the marketing and publicity and gets very complicated and lukewarm for them.
Marytza, is that, because it is so important and you know the end game of what you're doing, is it starting to enter into the author's consciousness that I need to write this book this way? Because like Krishan says, once the words are done, that's kind of when the work begins. But is that a disruption in terms of what you're doing?
So I wrote a pretty weird ass book, and I'm surprised that I was able to find, a really enthusiastic editor and a whole team that understood what I was trying to do as a writer and as, an artist. Like, there's some drawings in there, there's, it goes in a lot of different directions. And I think that I had a really unique experience where I was really tenacious with what I wanted my stories to be and what I wanted a reader experience to feel like. I was lucky enough, really. I think I was really lucky, or it was the witchcraft that I did. I'm not sure what it was that resulted in me having a really pleasant and supportive experience that, while I had the same experience while going through the publishing process as I was in the creation process, where I know that my ethnicity, my cultural background, everything that populates my imagination, that formed who I am as a writer, was able to be on the page and was supported and wasn't questioned. And it also wasn't the main focus of the way that the editorial team at Live Right worked with me. They were asking questions about, clarity and structure, instead of questioning, my use of Spanish or the use of cultural markers that would be very specific, to Mexican audiences, or be understood specifically by people with Latinx backgrounds. So I think that, I would want this experience for every writer, and I know that that's not where we're currently at. And what I tend to do, or what I really prioritize, just because it did take me a while to find an agent and a publisher, is that I started defining success in a different way. And, I think that I don't have this idea that I'm going to be a writer full time. I really do love my day job, and I like that balance and that tension of working a 9 to 5 and then also, struggling to find the time to write. But I really do think that that's something that has allowed me to kind of preserve that creative space, that writing space, to just be a place where I can, write these stories and be a little bit more experimental. But even if that's not what a writer wants, you should be able to make a career as a writer. And if that's what you want, you should be able to have that opportunity without fighting every step of the way and, trying to prove who you are, prove that your stories are valid. So I think that, again, I had a really, unfortunately, abnormal experience, something that I do wish for everyone, but I really would, just stick to, the tenacity of what I wanted to say, and then being able to make sure that everyone I was working with felt that same way about what I was trying to create for a reader.
Okay. So, Elizabeth, please go ahead, Krishan.
I just wanted to add that from a writer's perspective now, I was just thinking as she spoke that when I was creating the Queens of the Resistance series, it's a book about 4 women and it's diverse. That was a question that I had to ask myself is, okay, do I want to write 4 books about 4 women of color in politics? And I had to, and it's just something that, again, that writers and I think creators in general go through when you're a person of color. And I decided that at the heart of it, what I really wanted to do with the books was to write as a Black woman about politics, about anyone I wanted, and give sort of my perspective, and my perspective as a person of color, writing about a white woman in politics and empowering her and empowering other people of color that's what I represent. It's how I grew up in New York, and it's something that means a lot to me. But I did find that people, at the end of the day, they're really interested in the Maxine Waters and AOC books. I rarely get any questions about the Elizabeth Warren and Nancy Pelosi books. I mean, politics are controversial, but I just found that really interesting. I'm like, oh, well, I guess we should have did a series of Black. And then I did have a lot of people come to me and say, oh, why you didn't do Ayanna Pressley? And I said, I thought I was going to have more books to continue the series. But yeah, so I just think that, I just want to sort of show that writers of color have different things that they have to think about when publishing. And my solution is to give them the space by making sure that as publishers that we're hiring and in multiple areas of publishing. And so that way, we could have, I just think it's going to open up the door about, you feeling safe and comfortable and doing things your way and driving books towards certain audiences with comfort.
Okay, so for Richard and Elizabeth, I'm sure that there is a path to success historically and even in the present. I know social media is probably a huge thing right now as well. But what have you seen, and what do you see coming on the horizon that will help authors maybe get, I don't want to say an easier path because everything is hard to a degree, but less obstacles in their way in terms of specifically race and cultural applications for what they're trying to do? Is there anything, have you seen anything in the past, and do you see anything coming in the future that can help this process?
I mean,
I'll start with you. Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't think there's any, formula to success for an author aside from writing something that really touches people. So I don't think, I just wouldn't say, jump on social media if that's not your thing.
Oh, it froze again. Comes back in a second. Okay.
Yeah, just that 100% of the time and energy should be put into writing something authentic and meaningful that and from the heart that's going to connect. So an agent or a reader or a bookseller, they're going to feel that authenticity. I don't think there's any formula for kind of jumping around or jumping ahead. It's just writing a book that's really just going to speak to people.
Right. This is great. And my own perspective is just thinking about some of the structural factors and institutional factors, and something that I've seen in the past, the practice of comping. So when an author wants to sell a book, they put forward titles that their book is like, that they're being compared to. And a study that came out a few years ago from Laura McGrath called Comping White showed that 95% of comp books are written by white authors, which is a really astonishing number, in that most, say, then minority authors are literally being compared to white authors in terms of the stories that they're trying to tell and the books that they're trying to sell. And I think something that I'm sanguine about is that is starting to change, that the path to telling your story as a minority author, that institutional structural problem that you're always being compared to a white baseline, this sort of comping white problem. I'm hopeful that this is starting to change with more minority editors, particularly acquiring editors. But that was a really serious problem as recent as a few years ago, that the path to success, to just selling a book and telling the story that you want, I think was more challenging for minority authors because of this comping problem. But I'm hopeful that this can change over time, looking to the future.
Okay.
And I'll just add that I'll just add that one area, like, because you asked about the future, that I'm excited to see is the entry of Black booksellers and also bookstagrammers. I just think that there's something there that hasn't been explored as deeply, and is something to look at in terms of how we can help Black authors. And I just think that, you know, if we can provide more support to those booksellers and those bookstagrammers, and, you know, just people out here just marketing books that are people of color, that's another area that is a way to look forward and is exciting, and it helps, you know, fulfill sort of equity and monetary gaps in our industry. And it speaks to the times, because now we're a digital, although, you know, books, we're very sort of scared of gravitating towards digital spaces every time a new thing happens, ebooks, then audiobooks. I just think that there's something with the digital marketing that is creating great opportunity.
That was actually going to be my next question, was about the digital space and going into that. And, you know, I was going to ask the broader question about what's being overlooked, like what is happening right now. You mentioned Bookstagram, which I had never heard of. You just said that was very cool. Are there things that we're overlooking that can help us? And after this, I'll go into some questions that we got from outside our talk right now from viewers. Is there any, Marytza, is there anything that you've kind of, you know, heard in terms of things that you might want to try out that, you know, you could pass on to other authors that are trying to get their work seen?
So I love going on Bookstagram for recommendations. I know that Book Talk is really, you know, where a lot of people, my sister's always sending me these clips and encouraging me, but I am not great at social media. So I think I updated my website maybe 6 months ago after not doing it for about 4 years. So, you know, I think that that's something that I keep at an arm's length unless someone sends me clips or something that they really, really recommend that I should look into. But I'm always, you know, impressed when people can find creative ways to experiment or to tell their stories, you know, through the reels or through, you know, creative dances. I think when I started dipping my toe in there to do an unboxing video, just because, you know, I felt like this is something that authors are doing. It's my first book, got to get into it. So I, instead of pulling out my book, I pulled out a decapitated head, but it wasn't a real decapitated head. It was plastic, and then, you know, I shared my book. But I felt like something like that, I really like it when, you know, writers can be creative and a little bit more experimental with what they're doing, these things that we kind of expect from writers now, you know, the unboxing or the big announcement of their publisher's marketplace deal. And when people can be creative about that, that's always something that I'm interested in seeing, kind of flip those things on their head.
Okay, very cool. I'm going to go into some questions now from that were submitted for us beforehand. I hope I have the right ones here. Here's one from Tar, T-A-R-R. Well, I guess this can go specifically to Richard, but to anyone else that may. Are there publishing researchers whose work you would like to recommend looking into further?
Thanks for your questions. It's every academic's favorite question, so I'm happy to answer this. But there's a number of researchers that are very interested in this question of the culture industries, publishing included, and what's really energizing this area of study, why it's been newly invested with energy and people getting into this field, is the availability of data, that we can really study culture industries, publishing with much more detail and precision because there's just so much more data that's available. So I would really point you to some of my colleagues, Laura McGrath teaches at Temple. She wrote an essay called Comping White, which is about that problem of comparison titles and whiteness that I mentioned. My colleague Dan Sinnigan, who teaches at Emory, he has a book called The Conglomerate Era, coming out from Columbia University Press very soon. And at the journal magazine, Public Books, I just helped publish a series of data-driven essays on publishing, but also looking at things like the New York Times, the New Yorker, and problems of equity and diversity in those cultural industries too. So Public Books, and the series was called Hacking the Culture Industries, which again, a series of data-driven studies of publishing, literary marketplace, and culture more generally. So there's a lot of exciting work coming out. So thank you for that.
Very cool. Okay, I will direct this next question to let's go with Elizabeth here. The question is, what initiatives should be made to help writers in poor communities to show and develop their talent?
What initiatives should be taken?
Yeah, I guess they're asking if there should be any particular kind of programs that can be enacted. I don't know if they're talking financial or. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts in this. A lot of it has to be in schools and after school programs that encourage writing. I know here in Los Angeles, there are those kinds of programs, Girls Write Now, like where they gather young women from high school and who are from lower income families, and encourage them to submit short stories and personal essays and have mentors. I think mentorship is a huge part of it. So whether it's in the school or an after school program, just encouraging that, I think can be involved sponsoring, donating money to these kinds of programs that are really grassroots and don't have much funding. So I think that is going to be a huge part of it.
Okay. Very cool. Programs. Okay, we have a question here from, well, that's a very long question. Okay, let's go to Laura. We have a question from Laura here, and I will direct this to Krishan, but what areas of literary activism excite you the most right now?
Literary activism. I don't know what to say about that.
I can't define it. I'm just.
I don't know. I guess the books that people are writing that they have sort of the soft activist books, like things that have to do with self-care, especially for certain communities of color, and they also have the more I'm doing a book called Beyond Policing about the future of policing and what it should look like, the future of public safety. But so I just think the openness to the books, and and there's a lot of room for that now. People are very curious about creating change because of a lot of the intensity happening socially and in politics. And I just think that the books are getting a lot more space and on people's shelves and readers' readership. I think books that may have been not like, sort of Ibram Kendi, who's writing about anti-racism. I mean, that a few years ago may not have had the placement that it has today, but readers have shown that these are the sort of books that they're interested. So I just think the activism from the writers not holding back on, putting certain issues and trying to sort of have these thought books to find solutions and putting those to paper is exciting.
Okay. Here's a question I'll ask to Marytza and to Elizabeth. It's from Anna. She says, I think diversity awareness increases as we have more access to books that are translated or in translation. She asked, can we make that a part of our discussion? Is that a is that a part of the discussion in terms of getting, more people of color interested in things, is making sure that books, not only that are, of interest to them, but just are of wider interest or in different cultures, that they're being translated to, I would say locally dominant, translations. It can be any kind that are around here. Like I know that there are books that are being translated into Armenian around where I live that weren't traditionally written that way. So is that being discussed? Are you guys hearing that at all?
Well,
I'll start
I
with
just
yeah.
eat up all of the, the books coming out from Latin American authors, like these, these really dynamic women authors that I'm thinking about. Like I just read Mona and, the Samantha Schweblin and everything that Mika McDowell is translating, I think are really exciting. And they also allow, I think when we were putting my book out, those were the comps that we were using. So I felt like that was really helpful, at least in my own publishing journey.
And I think Marytza, said that very well. So I don't have too much to add aside from, I think there, I would love to see more works in are able to use the author who might be internationally based to come over and do the tours and all of that and the interviews in English. So there's an additional challenge, but certainly we want to see more works in other languages available.
Okay. There's another question here. It's along the same lines of another question, and I will ask it of Richard, and I'll tweak it a bit. Is from Oscar, and it's asking how diverse communities can create, nurture, and expand their local community publications with quality journalists and produce effective information for this populace. In terms, this will go, I'll do a historically question again for you, but in terms of maybe even self-publishing, what kind of success rates are you seeing with people of color doing, and is there even enough, is there enough data to actually see exactly how popular, how good, how well they do, and how much space on the shelves, will get dedicated to self-publishing?
It's a great question. We don't really have any good studies or good data on this. Just anecdotally, though, things like Amazon self-publishing and also websites like Wattpad, which are essentially self-publishing user-generated content websites. I see a broad space for minority writing. Wattpad, which has 100 million users, they're promoting genre hashtags like talk the POC, particularly during the summer of 2020. And those platforms can be good for minority authors in that there's less gatekeeping, and it's more of a kind of open democracy of taste, and people write what they want to write. How much of that is penetrating the mainstream? I don't know, and I'm not too sanguine in that most of the breakout hits from self-publishing have tended to be more in popular genres like romance and science fiction and predominantly white authors. So I see a lot of potential in these spaces, the self-publishing space, historically, again, as relatively free of gatekeeping and really encouraging of diversity, minority perspectives, again, like what we see with Wattpad or even like fan fiction. But for whatever reason, the breakout hits, the writers that have been able to cross over to the popular mainstream, to professional publishing, has not been favorable to minority authors. I'm not really sure why, and that would be great if that could change over time, but I'm not really sure how to affect that change.
Well, I just want to add also that it has been, in a way, in the past, to Black writers, the boom of the early 2000s, the writers like Elin Harris or Terry McMillan, who were self-publishing and selling books out of the back of their cars and everything, led to a boom in Black writers during that time, and also a boom in a category that we deemed urban fiction, which brought on tons of Black editors in-house and tons of books being published. I was an editorial assistant at that time, and we were publishing a bunch of sort of what we call street lit. So that all came out of self-publishing, and I think that the question is really smart, because I think that that's an area that I'm not advocating self-publishing or not self-publishing, but I just think that is an area where you can sort of target your audience and reach the consumer who you know for sure is interested in your work. And it has created vehicles for people, like when they're successful, to get into big houses and be published. And usually publishing is responsive to what's already been working. So that's why in that time, there was a lot more sort of people that were, I can't think of many of them off the top of my head, but there was some people making really good, authors making really good six-figure deals, and they had started off as self-published at that time.
Wow. Okay. We have some very specific questions about specific communities getting books and made for them, and children's literature as well. I'll ask it. It's from April. She's asking that have literary leaders, has the community discussed how to get more books published that tell the stories of mixed race communities and Native American communities in children's literature specifically? It's very specific, this question, but just kind of branching out from that, children's literature, it's a different animal, I would assume, and have any of you, experienced or had experience in writing for children and, children of color as well, which I think is even more niche, I would assume. I've seen more books on the shelves, including books from Lupita Nyong'o and other people that are trying to write books for children. Is that, I'll start with Elizabeth, is that a genre that is, up and coming for people of color in general? And are there other specific genres that might be up and coming that I don't want to say people need to concentrate on at all, but in general, are there up and coming genres specifically that people of color can look for?
Children's publishing, and I think the trend there is definitely to acquire more diverse authors. I don't have the data to give right now in terms of like the increases that we're seeing, but I think that publishers, editors, marketers understand that parents want to read their children. I mean, I can speak as a parent myself. I want to show my children books with pictures that look like them. We come from a Spanish-speaking background. I want to be able to share that heritage with them. So I think the trend is definitely that there's an increase in trying to get diverse authors for children's literature, and that it's both ways. Diversifying the publishing houses and getting the authors and artists. That's the other component for children's books. There are a lot of them are illustrators and writers.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of the Native American component of that question, I'm not exactly sure. I don't have data on that. I know that certainly that community needs a lot more representation on television, in books, in our political sphere. So there's a lot of work to be done.
Okay. I think that's probably the final question that we need to ask from the questions that came in. I want to thank everyone here for their answers and their time. for this important question, important topic in general. And if there's anything that you want to say on your kind of outro, please go right ahead. We'll start with Krishan.
Outro.
Just kind of pulling you into it. Just pulling you into it.
So just thinking of the last question, because I was wondering if the person who wrote in has a book idea and they're mixed race, or so I guess I'll just leave it with this. Maybe a lot of the viewers are writers. Do as Toni Morrison did and write the book that you want to see in the world. And just like Elizabeth said, it starts with good material, and definitely tell people in your communities about publishing and how it works, and help them and have them attend these book festivals and these sort of events with you, so that they can have some sort of awareness as well. Follow Legacy Lit. You can tell them to follow Legacy Lit on Instagram. And you could also follow me on Instagram, Krishan Trotman, and Legacy Lit Books.
Marytza, who is social media averse, let's let you have a final word, and maybe you can give out your social media information as well.
Sure. One thing I do want to say is that I spent a lot of time with this report the last couple of days. I just printed it out and really read it, and I shared it with the people that I work with, because even though we're working in a different industry, I did find a lot of parallels. And what was really encouraging was the conclusion of, there's a lot of useful strategies, and they feel like they can be applied to work that we're trying to do to change this type of, arts industry and this type of culture that is, just really, really just embedded, in white supremacy. And I think that this was just a really well done, fantastic report. And one of the things that I've just been thinking about a lot, even throughout this conversation, is there was, this question of what about the stories that aren't being told? And, and not just that, not just like the author or their story that is, being ignored or undervalued, but you think about the ripple effect of a book, the ripple effect of a story that you read that really just can transform your life, can really, provide, a salve or a way forward, or just, spur something creatively within you, and how that then has a ripple effect. So that's just something that I've been really thinking about, is just what isn't being shared, what isn't being told. And then as a result of that, the exponential effect of the stories that we aren't hearing. So I'm hoping that this report and the people who are so committed to transformation and really just taking on this work, it's when you're in this, when you're doing it, when you're employed in this type of industry, it can take its toll, and it can be weary with it. But it does seem like having these moments where there are these, really thoughtful strategies, and that there are these other alternative systems of care that people are building for each other to sustain each other. That's just it's just incredibly encouraging. So thank you.
Okay. And thanks for bringing it back to the PEN report itself. And Richard, would you have any parting words?
Yeah, just really briefly. I also just wanted to encourage everyone watching this this program to really check out this PEN America report, because it's I just want to echo, it's really astonishing. And the thing that I really took from it is the lesson of how historically entrenched racial inequality has become within publishing. Just the entrenchment over decades and decades of publishing, and how much work it's going to take to really start to undo these patterns. That's really going to take many, many years of really vigilance and effort from everyone who cares about books, not just publishers, editors, and writers, but also readers, to really, again, stay vigilant and put in the effort to really make this transformation of this industry. Again, given how sedimented, entrenched racial inequality has become really its historical story. So that's really what I took from this report, which again is really astonishing and eye-opening, and I hope everyone will check it out.
And for you, Elizabeth, final words?
Well, I'd like to end on a note of hope. I did read the report, and it is very sobering. And I'd like to see how far we've come. And then reading the report, I realized how much further, exponentially we have to go. It's really a long way. But I do believe that people in the publishing community do have good intentions, and that we're in it for the long haul. I think it's going to take a lot of work to break down the, just the notion that the people. I also understand that, as a consumer and a parent, that a $30 hardcover book is not really accessible for some people and for some families. So I think we need to figure out ways as publishing professionals to make books accessible for everyone. Books are for everyone, no matter your background, no matter how much money you make, no matter if you didn't, if your parents didn't go to college or you didn't go to college. Books are for everyone, and they can change lives. So I think, I know I'm completely committed to making publishing and, the world of books alive for everyone. And I think it's going to take a lot of tenacity and to get a new generation, a younger generation in the front door.
Oh, come on, unstick. Wow. Okay.
That it's going to take a new generation coming in and sticking with it, and that we need to mentor them so that they feel supported and want to stay.
Okay. Well, thank you all very much for this wonderful conversation. Thank you to PEN America for hosting this with the LA Times, and for the report in general, which I encourage everyone to go read to find out more about the industry and where we have to go. And that's about it. So thank you all for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.